Welcome, Jeffery Witsoe, for talking to us at TrueCircles.net. You are a professor at Union College in New York, and you have written a book. And name of the book is
Democracy Against Development.
Democracy Against Development. And I think a little bit that I read about the book is you positioning that there is a tension between democracy and development, even though current narrative has been is that, or the popular narrative has been that India, especially because of democracy, is also, it can develop, and all the things that's happening in India. But you're going your narrative, because you worked in Bihar for a very long time, so you are bringing those stories out, and you see things differently than what the narrative is right now. So can you elaborate what is the view from the grassroots level in terms of what's happening in India, in terms of how people perceive development, and what is the tension again?
Well, the tension that I sought to highlight in the title of my book was, it's really about politics, democratization in a place where caste is very important, and development, which has been driven by the state. And the thing is that the same institutions that are required to deliver development have historically been controlled by upper caste groups. And so there was a tension between bureaucratic institutions and a new class of lower caste political leaders who were elected in the wake of Mandal in the 1990s.
So, going back a little bit, so you have lived in Bihar, you lived in a village in Bhojpur for more than a year, and you've been in and out of Patna for many years now, and you have a lot of politicians closely in Bihar. So what made you, once you decided to work on this issue, what made you choose Bihar? Because Bihar is not the only state where there is this kind of caste equation persists, and there is a very close interaction between caste and politics. Why did you choose Bihar?
It's more that Bihar chose me.
Oh, okay.
So part of it is, when I really started this work, I first went to Bihar in 1997. I've pretty much been back every year since then. Mm-hmm. The bulk of my field work was 2000. I was there in 2001, but then 2002, 2003 for my PhD, and then I've continued to go back since then. At that time, there was really almost no one studying the political changes that were taking place. And so there was this image of Bihar, which everyone knew about. Everyone was terrified of Bihar. Everyone thought I was crazy for going there. And partly because of that, no one was actually studying what was happening. And so I first went to Patna, and I actually liked it. And I was like, what's this, all this image about? What's this all about? And so I wanted to understand it. And so it was really Bihar that sucked me in and made me want to study politics in India, and made me actually start. It was Bihar that led the way, I guess.
Okay, that's very interesting. Okay, that kind of segues into my second question. So you have talked your book, Democracy Against Development, is the USP is that a lot of people has seen that how democracy or democratic movement have influenced caste equations and caste relationship, but you have kind of brought in a new perspective in terms of how caste equations and caste relations have influenced democratic development and how democracy involved in particular areas. So that's what your USP in your book is. I'm not sure if you have looked at other parts. Your book, you have elaborated a lot about it in terms of Bihar, but caste equations or caste conflict is not is just not in Bihar in India. Like if you look at western states, even if you look at southern states, it's been there. So how do you see from a comparative perspective this playing out in, say, a so-called developed state like Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra or even Gujarat, which is now as like Gujarat model? Mm-hmm. So what difference you see in terms of this interaction between caste equations and democracy development?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on the one hand, there's very distinct regional differences in India that are tied to different histories. So for instance, I mean, the colonial legacy is very different in zamindari areas versus non-zamindari areas. Gujarat has, certainly there's geographic differences in terms of coastal access, in terms of availability of land, things like this. Caste also differs, right? And in parts of, the non-Brahmin, the anti-Brahmin movement in the South, for instance, happened very early on. And so each state, each region has its own distinct political trajectory that needs to be studied. So it makes comparison a little difficult, but I do think that this tension that like during the Lalu period in particular, this tension between democracy and development just became very extreme and stark, and it enables us to see a tension that I think exists to various degrees across India.
Okay. So you were saying that it's everywhere else, but then given the peculiar realities of Bihar, it becomes very prominent.
And particularly during the period of the study of my book, right?
Okay.
But is the caste politics in Bihar and anything distinct about that makes it different than other places in India?
Well, Bihar is overwhelmingly rural, right? And so that does have an effect. The legacy of zamindari, I think, is, so you have landlordism to an extent in Bihar that you don't have everywhere. And you also have a history of social movements in Bihar, right? Even related to caste. The Triveni song, like in the 1930s, the Kisan Sabha, so even before independence. And then the rise of the backward caste movement in the 60s, the JP movement in the 70s, and so the Naxalite uprisings that centered in parts of Bihar. And so you have this history of social movements and social conflict. So I don't know. I've spent the most time in Bihar. That's the state I know best. I've traveled around most of India. But Bihar is the place that I can speak the most about.
You also, I think, you also talk a lot. You also talk about that the political culture of a particular state comes very much from the process. Not exactly in terms of a state as we call provinces a state in India, but like as a nation state, that the kind of culture we mostly talk about it in terms of India, Pakistan, that the political culture, the political culture of the country comes from the process through which the state was formed. But like if you can bring it down to the level of province, as we call it, state in India, can you talk about it in terms of Bihar, that the political culture, which is largely perceived to be very violent, very raw, and what that has to be with the kind of the realities on the ground?
So I think, one way to think of this is, so if you look at, for instance, the influence of caste, and so if you look at the caste associations that emerged in the early 20th century, and their role in creating colleges, for instance, and their role in generating networks that then become important for gaining access to public employment in the state bureaucracy, for instance. So it's a very distinct process. Something like this has happened in different parts of India, but in Bihar for a very long time, the upper caste had exercised hegemony over public life. And so I think that's very distinct. And so then democratization, that came in direct conflict with democratization, because upper castes, we don't know the exact number, but around 15% of the population, right, is basically dominating public life for, certainly after independence until the 60s, almost unchallenged. And then, even until today, have a disproportionate amount of influence and power. And so that's going to come into inevitable conflict with a process of democratization where everyone has the same vote, right? And so I think a lot of the violence is actually because of this. It's a type of social churning that's an inevitable outcome of a conflict between a process of democratization and certain entrenched forms of influence and power that are resistant to that, right? And if the state is controlled by groups that feel they're becoming disenfranchised because because of democracy, like that explained a lot of the breakdown of governance that occurred during the 1990s in Bihar.
one more question on Lalu. So the popular wisdom is, and having lived through that period, at least for the first 10 years of Lalu's governance, first 12 years actually, I left 2002. So people say that when 1990 was actually Janata Dal did not have a majority, and it was like coalition partners with left and everybody, and people actually say that 90 to 95 was the golden period for social justice in India, because most of the reforms you saw, most of the change on the ground you actually see today, the result of those 5 years. And 1995 actually Janata Dal under Lalu got majority on its own. And that's where the decline started. So when people say that Lalu is being given undue credit in terms of bringing this social justice revolution in Bihar, because that was never his intention. He only wanted to kind of empower the Yadavs at max and stop the flow of power further down. So what your studies and your observation and interaction with like various people in Bihar say to that?
Well, there's a number of questions in that. I mean, the decline, I mean, it's a complex story. So on the one hand, yeah, this is the period that shows the most dramatic change. 1990 to 1995, if you look at this is when the OBCs really, their representation like basically jumps, and upper caste representation almost halves in the state assembly in this a short period of time. But Lalu, I mean, and there's outside forces, because it's the Mondal commissions, it's Mondal that's really the driving force of this. But Lalu definitely was a force that made these social changes much more visible and much more kind of dramatic on the ground in Bihar. And so I mean, it's a story of both. I mean, there's a larger influence and what's happening in the state. The decline really starts, I mean, I think it's not 1995. It's really when the fodder scam breaks. So it's really 96, 97 when suddenly then he's under attack and basically, is willing to use almost any means to remain in power. And the other question in terms of Yadavs versus, I mean, this became the central contradiction, right? That OBC empowerment in practice ended up meaning Yadav empowerment. I think this was phrased internally. If you look at certain speeches that were made, say to the Yadav Mahasabha, the Yadavs were often seen as like the vanguard of this revolution, right? Other castes didn't necessarily agree with this, but this was the idea that Yadavs, something like 15% of the population, it's the largest caste in India, and so if they could be empowered, it would kind of break. That was the way to break upper caste hegemony, and then that would lead to a larger social transformation. As we know, I mean, Yadavs did end up getting kind of the lion's share of the benefit, and certain other castes started to break off. First the Gurmis with Nitish Kumar in 1994, and so there was a fragmentation of the backward castes.
So growth of BJP, would you say that it's just the transfer of upper caste vote from, say, Congress to BJP, or has there been any other forces at play here that will explain?
Well, recently there's been a lot, but that was like what had happened. I mean, before the BJP was kind of known as an upper caste party plus Banias. Basically transferring the vote from Congress. Recently the situation's changed dramatically with the rise of Narendra Modi, right?
Coming to Nitish Kumar, and Nitish Kumar is no less colorful politician than, I mean, politically speaking, than Lalu, with the shades he has changed from NDA to out of NDA and everything. But then in his first term from 2005 to 2010, I think a little bit later as well, he kind of was talking a lot about Bihari subnationalism as a way of kind of engendering Bihari pride among people. I mean, it's not a new theory. A lot of people like Arvind Narayan Das and others have talked about it earlier, and the thesis was that people don't feel so connected because there is no feeling of subnationalism, and that's why if you really want to develop and move ahead, you have to do that. But then, very surprisingly, I find that around that time it completely he shut it down. Like he stopped it. He actually hired and later became Rajya Sabha MP from JD Pawan Verma as culture, I don't know what he is, cultural advisor or cultural secretary, to kind of develop this idea further. But then he kind of stopped completely, like, no, it's not, should not become like Marathi Manus kind of thing which happens in Maharashtra, or in some other state they're very strong regionalism. So what's your take on that? Do you really see Bihari sub-nationalism as a feasible platform on which a politician or a political party can really play in Bihar? Why yes or why no?
It's not enough to win an election, but it's not that it has no influence. So I mean, this is being played up even now in the current election, right? Where because the BJP doesn't have strong leaders in the state.
Regionally, yeah.
Regional leaders, right? So they'll strong, it's really Modi and Shah, and so I mean, you can play the whole Bihari pride. These are outsiders. This is definitely, and then the whole comment that Modi made that Nitish's DNA is bad, and then that's an insult to Bihari pride, and so it's a factor. I don't think it's not a factor that so it's a factor, but it's not you're not gonna win an election based on Bihari pride. I think now before he was really trying to create this image of unity and social harmony, partly because by the end of the Lalu period things had gotten there was a lot of conflict, right? The politics of Mandal had created, and everything else that happened in the wake of the fodder scam. There was kind of a breakdown of governance, and there was a lot of conflict in many places, right? And so there was a demand for social harmony. Nitish Kumar succeeded in creating that to a pretty significant extent, particularly compared to what was at the very end of the Lalu period. And so this should be seen in that context. Now things are shifting dramatically. Once Nitish Kumar left the NDA, the upper caste have completely abandoned him. Now suddenly there's a new kind of caste conflict at play, and so the idea of subnationalism is going to be kind of superseded, I would say.
Well, Bihari sub-nationalism will be superseded by the caste conflict.
So they're using it, but you can't say, this is election like Lalu is it was once again Mandal 2, backward caste struggle against forward caste, and at the same time say, no, this is about Bihari nationalism, sub-nationalism, and Bihari pride. You can use it a little bit to discredit outsider politicians, but it seems that once again, Bihar's political history has been, one way to read Bihar's political history is there's periods of stability, and then periods of kind of tumultuous political change, right? And so we look, you can look at the early period after independence is a very stable kind of period with Sri Babu, and then in the 60s, particularly by 67, now you have this whole period of where the backward caste movement starts to rise, and you have chief ministers shifting constantly. I think there's something like 7 or chief ministers in a very short period of time. Then the 80s, it becomes a bit stable again. 90s, Lalu comes in and everything is completely shaken up, and then Nitish comes in and is stable again. And so we'll see. Are we now looking towards another period of tumultuous political change? I don't know, but that's kind of the engine of history. That's the way that you have incremental change in a democracy. This is part of this tension I'm talking about between democracy and development as well, right? So there's this tension, but it does drive historical change. And we'll see. We don't know what the future is going to bring, but it's a possibility.
Coming back to what's happening right now and the campaign mode and the election so we are hearing about this a new narrative which we also heard about in the general elections last year, that people even in rural areas, even from backward communities and backward caste, have moved on from caste politics, and there is this new thing called aspirational, they have got more aspirational objectives. So caste is fine, emancipation is fine, but people are not, either they don't like it or they're not just not satisfied with it. They want more. And whereas social justice movement, people like Lalu, people like Nitish have done their role, now you need a Modi to kind of cater to the aspirations of these people. So they don't not talking about discrimination based on caste. They want private sector jobs, they want iPhones, or just to use an example kind of thing. And this election and the last election was fought, and in a way partially being projected by BJP, that is being fought on those issues of aspirations. People want to go the next step. What is your assessment? You were till very recently very deeply involved, and even now you're keeping an eye. So what is how much truth to that idea you see, really?
I think it's, people, particularly by the end of the Lalu period, people want a certain amount of stability, and development matters now, and so you can't you can no longer be like Lalu in certain instances was almost like opposed to. At least he didn't think development was very important. Those days are gone. People now want, they're going to demand a certain level of law and order. They're going to want, roads, the basic stuff. So the aspirations are there, but I don't think it's not at all true that this election is not caste versus development. And certainly not caste on one side and development on the other where Modi is. Because first of all, like Nitish Kumar has the best record of development, and he's he's done it for, the last decade. And so, I think people that are going to vote for development would probably, at the very least, split their votes evenly between them. But caste still matters as well. And this idea that aspiration and caste are separate, how are you going to get your job in the private sector? I mean, we know people that migrate, they get a lot of their connections are through caste networks. How are you going to get your job in the public sector hiring, which is what a lot of people really want? It's, caste matters. And so it's really that the two are not as separate as it's often made out to be. And both sides are playing caste. I mean, so this election, partly because of Nitish and Modi both are like Vikas Parush. They both have the image of being strong, capable, development-oriented leaders. Because of that, because that exists on both sides, caste is playing out in this election much more strongly than certainly in the last election.
And I'm not asking you to predict, but do you think, based on your understanding, based on the political situation in Bihar, if caste plays a bigger and bigger role, who would benefit more from it? Which side?
No, then it comes down to like what's actually happening. And it's not caste is going to play more or less. Bihar elections are caste oriented. It's just the way things work in Bihar. And you're not going to win. If you just ignore caste, you'll never win an election in Bihar. And so we saw that, for instance. I mean, how much support Nitish Kumar had, and as soon as he broke with the BJP and suddenly the upper caste abandoned him, how quickly everything changed. How quickly did the media's coverage change?
Right.
How quickly did the media coverage shift? Overnight. It happened overnight. I was in Patna when that happened. How much, the way people were talking, it was a remarkable shift. And so, no, the idea that caste doesn't matter is I mean, in a state like Bihar, it's kind of ridiculous. So it definitely matters. The question is, how is that going to play out in this election? And everyone knows this. The BJP knows this as well as anyone, right? I mean, they're spending a lot of time trying to get the caste, their caste kind of alliance right, because that's the way you're going to win. And so it's going to play out. It's going to all come down to who has assembled the best kind of alliance and coalition, and that's the whole. We can talk about that if you want.
So yesterday at the Harvard program, you mentioned that this election, Bihar, is about like two power centers, basically. So if you can elaborate what those power centers are and how that translates into, what are the election issues that are being discussed and are not discussed.
Sure. In terms of, one very interesting thing in this election, well, first is just the rise of the BJP and the kind of influence and that the BJP has, which, it had always been a kind of, a coalition partner, not a party that you could conceive of winning on its own. And now that has changed. That's basically because of the rise of Narendra Modi, and the so-called Modi wave has totally changed the political geography in Bihar, resulting in the coming together of Lalu Yadav and Nitish Kumar, something which was unthinkable until very recently in the political history in Bihar. For the last 2 decades has been basically a battle between these two men, and now they're suddenly together. And so, as part of that, there's a very strong, almost unprecedented consolidation of upper caste behind the BJP, right? Kind of like in the early years of the 1990s, but without like the full backward caste consolidation. So now they're trying to create that on the other side, but partly because the BJP is an alliance with like Ram Vilas Paswan and Manji. And Kushwaha, so it's more complex now. So it's not a return to the early 90s. Rather, I kind of see it as now two rival centers of power. One, upper caste with allies, and the other upper backward. So really Yadav, Kurmi, and with Muslim support because of the BJP, right? and then both of those like centers of power are trying to create alliances and bring votes from what's called EBCs, Annexure 1 or extremely backward castes, and Dalits or what are known as Mahadalits in Bihar. And so there's intense competition, caste by caste, basically, for the support of these groups.
So what are the issues that are being discussed in this election or not being discussed? So right now it's like everything is about caste, not even about development. Like what are the model for development for Bihar? Like that's not being discussed. Or what is missing from this election campaign that's happening?
What would I like to see?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I mean, Nitish Kumar's credentials for like good governance are well known. Everyone knows this. Who's in Bihar? He definitely restored law and order. His success in like building roads, this kind of thing, is well known. So his shortcomings have been, in terms of like employment generation, and I don't know if another government probably couldn't fix this. I mean, there's reasons why Biharis are forced to migrate out of the state, but there hasn't been the kind of private sector investment that people might want in Bihar. But this isn't like it's really is when you get down to the local level, it's basically caste-based competition, and it's. I mean, in a way, if you're a Dalit living in a village in Bihar, I mean, yeah, you want like the road matters, like security matters, these things matter, but it also matters like who the Mukhia of your village is. It matters the house over there that is like literally dominated over your family since like the time of your great grandfather and even earlier, and who has power over the village. These are things that matter in Bihar, and this is why in Bihar, in a way, all politics is local. We could say that that's true, and so. For people don't believe politicians anyway. So to make a bunch of, to talk about these larger development-oriented policies, which people know from experience aren't actually gonna probably get implemented anyway, because politicians do have a habit of lying. Everyone knows that, and in a way, it makes more sense to make sure that the leaders that are going to benefit you get elected.
I see. Good.
So, you have lived in Bhojpur, in a village in Bhojpur for about a year and a half?
I've been going back, so I've spent a long time in Bihar. I've probably spent over 5 years in.
But like a particular village you were talking about.
Yeah.
Is like, so can you talk a bit about like any incident or like any happening which kind of put things in perspective so much that why Bihar, the caste, the politics, it's so intense, or like any like anecdote from any story which made you feel. Of course you're a researcher, you try to keep yourself aloof from so you can be independent and impartial. But anything which you saw, which you observed, which you experienced, which you really made you feel that okay, this is it. Like this is how caste operates in Bihar. This is how politics operates in Bihar on the ground.
Wow, one story. Almost any story. I will say this: when I lived there, but this is a period, right? This is a period, kind of the end of the RJD period. It was like 2002, 2003, when caste politics was kind of at its most intense, and so the village was totally divided by caste. So much so that I was really to some extent the Mukhia was able to, but otherwise very few people went across the different, because the village is divided into different tolas where different castes live. It's not total, but there is a kind of a social geography of the village. And I was really the only one, the Mukhia to some extent, and I was the only other one who really would just constantly cross these boundaries. And it was very difficult because everyone knew that I was doing this, and so it was very hard to gain, because there was so much tension, and so everyone knew I was speaking to their enemy, basically. People would always say, why were you over there? Why are you talking to those? You shouldn't be talking to that guy. Don't do that. But I had to. And so I basically wanted to make sure that I was covering every section of the village as much as I could so I can get a sense of this. Every section of the village had its own small leaders and it's almost like its own little world. And so I was crossing these boundaries in a way that other people in the village weren't. And so it was like my everyday life made this clear. It wasn't something I had to kind of realize at one moment. It was basically how everyday life was structured.
So you were saying that there's no like any like social interaction between things?
No, there's social interactions, but I mean, I guess another example would be, which I do write about in the book, certain nights. So the village had been historically Rajput dominated. The Rajputs were zamindars in this village and surrounding villages as well. But I mean, at the end of the Lalu period, there's actually the Yadavs are more populous in the village than Rajputs, and by the end. There would be nights when Yadavs would hold bhajans, and there'd just be Yadavs everywhere, all over the village, and it was kind of a rough scene, and everyone else would be hiding, kind of, and it was kind of an example of just how they had, at least for that period, kind of taken over the village to some extent. That's now changed, and after coming to power of Nitish Kumar, I think all that kind of stuff kind of stopped. The village itself got kind of a little bit wild at the end.
So if you look at,
I mean, another example I think I give in the book too is just walking. I was sitting once in the field and I was sitting with someone with a I was sitting with a Dalit, like a laborer, just talking with them, and a family that would have been a zamindar family. In the colonial past is walking by, and I mean in the past you'd be expected to like show this person a lot of respect, to even stand up and even maybe kind of give like a little kind of bow as he walked by, and he didn't even like get up, and he actually forced this guy to walk around him in the mud. And it was just kind of these little things, these little everyday issues of honor and respect that are so important to people's sense of dignity. Those are the kind of changes that took place.
And did you hear stories from them that how it used to be earlier and not anymore?
Absolutely. I mean, that's something that the younger generation is kind of forgetting because they grew up after all these changes had taken place. But there's definitely, I mean, democracy has transformed Bihar. It's often been messy. It's often led to negative outcomes. There's been collapse of weakening of government institutions at times. But there has been social change, and you can chart this over time, and I think it's been pretty profound. And so democracy is changing India, slowly but surely.
Coming back to like the issue of caste-based violence and the massacres, which we saw a lot of, mostly from one side, but also some from the other side. In it used to happen earlier as well, but also in 90s and like 2000. So there have been accusations on Lalu that he was at times playing like both sides, and Bhojpur, where you actually lived, kind of was a hotbed of that kind of caste-based violence, very ferocious, very barbaric. So, and he was not really into it, so he played on the side of the Dalits and the oppressed when it suited him, and not when it did not. So, talking to mostly people who come from the lower caste, the Dalits, and some of them are now called Mahadalits. What sense did you get? Like, did they really think about Lalu that way at that time, or the period during which Lalu was in power?
I mean, it's a complex. That's another complicated question. I would say that. I mean, there's a whole other part, which is particularly older people. They're aware of the change that took place, and it changed. Things happen differently in different places, right? There's still many villages in Bihar that are very much under the control of kind of the traditional landlords. So it really differs village to village. But one thing that did happen, particularly by the end of the Lalu period, is the Yadavs became kind of almost a new dominant caste. And for many, like extremely backward caste or Dalits, often were they felt oppressed now by Yadavs. In some ways it was worse because the landlord might beat you, but also would help pay for your daughter's wedding, or would give you some money when you're sick or medicine or whatever. This kind of patronage, this kind of old feudal patron relations. And so the new Yadav dominance didn't even have that, right? And so there is kind of among some, and it really depends. So if you're in a village where it depends on the village, and it's really there's definitely that. In terms of kind of Lalu being just a very shrewd, everyone knows he's a very, very shrewd politician. I think in his mind, he at a certain point saw kind of the project of backward caste empowerment being inseparable from he saw it as embodied in himself, right? He came from this poor Yadav family, becoming chief minister. That was his transformation. And so threats to his government were threats against the entire project. And so he would go to any length to remain in power, basically. And that's kind of my sense. So it really depends on who you talk to, what village, what the history of that village is. So that's the thing with India, and Bihar in particular. There's nothing you can say that just applies to everyone. It always differs.
Right. Historically, Muslim politics in Bihar has been, so-called mainstream. That they were always part of bigger parties, and historically, Muslim-only parties have not succeeded. Even historically, the Muslim League hasn't done very well. But now we see, All India Majlis Ittihad al-Muslimin of Asad Owaisi is trying to make some inroads. How do you see that? Is that a change in how Muslims in Bihar feel that they're being left out in this caste politics, and they're not getting the rewards of being, electing these people to power? Is that or what's your sense of what's?
I mean, well, no. I think, let's put it this way. I think in this election it won't really matter. Because of the BJP being there, it's uniting and consolidating the Muslim vote. The real split in Bihar is not that. It's the rise of the backward. It's caste amongst Muslims. The whole Pasmanda movement, which was quite important. It was quite important to Nitish Kumar's coalition.
Right.
It actually kept kind of the NDA in power, interestingly enough. I mean, it was a way to split it was just a way to totally destroy Lalu, right? If the Muslim vote isn't consolidated behind Lalu, he doesn't have his MY combination, right? Muslim plus Yadavs, which gives him this almost 28% core that enables you to really be a political force. Right. And so it was kind of this politics of caste playing out, and so it started to percolate in all kinds of areas, which actually fragmented the earlier alliance. So it's no longer forward versus backward. Now it's suddenly certain Muslim groups saying we haven't got the benefit. There's only certain castes of Muslims are getting most of the benefit or have all the leadership positions or whatever. And so you had Anwar Ali and people like that arise, and that was a real factor. I think in this election it no longer is. We're not hearing about that really, and the reason is because of the BJP. The BJP has reconsolidated the Muslim community, because at the end of the day, particularly if there's fear that there could be politically motivated communal violence, that's going to trump everything.
Which is happening. Which happened after BJP parted, or when
Yeah, because I had a lot of conversations with Muslims during the Lalu period when at that time the BJP was seen as ascendant, and they a lot of people told me, look, yes, there's a lot of things we don't like about Lalu. We would prefer a more development oriented kind of government, but at the end of the day, I got to make sure that my family's safe, and that's more important than everything.
Right.
So I think that's happening again now, right? And so these are things that are happening outside the state that then influence what happens inside as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you, Professor Witsoe, for spending time with us.
It's been a pleasure.